welcome to another video, welcome to another Thomas Hardy video, and welcome to another reading recap of the read-along. How many times can I say read in one sentence? So this is a recap of the reading experience that we had in September when we read Far from the Madding Crowd. If you're new here, we're doing a read-along of all of Thomas Hardy's novels in publication order. So that's 14 books, one a month for 14 months. And every month I do a short introductory video just letting you know what book we're reading in the next month and what you're letting yourself in for if you read along with us. And I also do a little recap. So this video is not a review of Far from the Madding Crowd. I will be telling you what I thought of it, so it's, I guess, a kind of mini review of just my thoughts about the book. But it will mostly be just a kind of a recap of the experience that we all had reading. So we read along on Discord and on Patreon, and people sometimes message me on Instagram as well. So I get a general sense of how people are getting along on that month and whether they're enjoying the book or not. And I kind of gather together all of those impressions for a very short video. There will be a link in the description box below to a couple of other videos which I would really like to direct you to, which are proper reviews of this book. So you can have a look a little bit more down below. In September we read Far from the Madding Crowd, which was Thomas Hardy's fourth novel. I think it's probably safe to say that it is the first of his novels that is very well known. It's one of the big novels that I think he's most well known for now. It's always the novel that people, when I see people asking, where should I start with Thomas Hardy, or what's your favourite Thomas Hardy? Quite a lot of the time people say Far from the Madding Crowd. I think one of the reasons for that is that whilst it does have some misery, because it's Thomas Hardy, and there has to be at least a little smattering of misery, I think that Far from the Madding Crowd is probably one of the least miserable of his really big novels. So it's nowhere near Tess, and it's definitely nowhere near Jude, which I think are probably the other two big ones. But I think it's definitely up there in the novels that people have heard of. And I think that of the four we've read so far, so we've had Desperate Remedies, which is his first novel. Most people hadn't read that who are joining him. And then we had Under the Greenwood Tree, which I think is one of his shortest, most pastoral, most nature writing, most vibes-based novel that Hardy has written so far. And I think that a few more people had read that, and it's slightly better known. And then we had A Pair of Blue Eyes, which a lot of people, again, it's a very unknown Hardy novel. But we're getting into the big hitters now. So interesting how this compares to, I can't wait to do the recap for October, because The Hand of Ethelberta was the next novel. So we're back to another novel that isn't particularly well known. But Far from the Madding Crowd is essentially a novel, really just a very quick introduction to it here. It's essentially a novel which is about Bathsheba Everdeen, who is a young woman who owns her own farm. If I'm summarising the plot really, really narrowly there, but she owns her own farm, and she has three men who are interested in her. You've got Gabriel Oak, who is a farmer in his own right, or a shepherd, has kind of gone up slightly in the world and then fallen kind of back down again. And then you've got, is it spoilers if I say? I feel like at this point most people have read it. If you're probably watching this video, you're looking for a recap, but I won't spoil it any further, but there's a couple of other people there. So that's just kind of a really quick summary of the type of novel that it is. And it's got all the usual kind of Hardy hallmarks of nature writing as well as love triangles. As with all of the read-along so far, I am really, really enjoying the discussions that people are having on Discord and being able to see a kind of backwards and forwards of what people are thinking as the reading month is going on. And I'm really enjoying, especially when everyone's opinions are so different and there's a great kind of diversity of opinion. Some people really loved Far from the Madding Crowd. Some people really did not like Far from the Madding Crowd. I think because, as I said, this is one of Hardy's really big novels, I was kind of expecting that most people would like it, and I was very pleasantly surprised that there were lots of dissenting voices. I don't think there was anyone who outright hated it. I could be wrong. I think some people DNF'd it, which, again, like with every month, there's going to be a handful of people who it's just not for them, and that's fair enough. But I don't think there was anyone who actually despised it. I think it's complicated for a lot of people, but I thought it was really interesting because I was expecting everyone to love it. And I think one of the reasons I was expecting that is not because I love it, because it's not one of my favourite Hardy novels. I think I was just expecting it because it is the one that people talk about all the time, and it's always the one that I hear people saying, oh, you should read this first. And I think, as I said, it is just because of that lack of complete abject misery. and just total despair, which you get in some of his other big novels. I think maybe that's why people recommend it, not necessarily based on it being the best, although it's really great. I'm saying all this with the caveat that I'm a huge Thomas Hardy fan, so of course I love all of his novels, but it's not my favourite by any stretch. Now, I usually do a poll after the month has ended, after people have had a little chance to kind of finish it, because some people, go over into the next month. I do a quick little poll just to kind of gauge an impression of what people thought. I ask whether you liked it, loved it, hated it, or whatever. I did add it's complicated for anyone who wanted to vote for that, because I know some people felt a little bit like it was complex, their feelings. 67% of people loved it, 22% liked it, a few people thought it was okay, nobody hated it. And I think that, a few people have commented to say that their feelings were quite complicated on it for very different reasons. Someone commented how this is sort of Hardy's first masterpiece. If we're talking about his novels in terms of some of them are considered to be masterpieces, this is the first one. So I think other people agreed with me that this is the first of his big hitters. And someone else said that it was a step forward compared to the first three novels. I think it is where reading in publication order really kind of shows how beneficial it is, because there is such a steep incline after A Pair of Blue Eyes. Far From the Madding Crowd feels like it's been written, for some people, they'd said it felt like it had been written by a completely different author. It was such a big step up, not necessarily in terms of themes or ideas, they were all still there and he's still working on it, and he's still got this very overly descriptive, perfectly described, some would say, but other people might say overly descriptive descriptions of the land. Descriptive descriptions, you know what I mean. There's a lot of description about the landscape and a lot about nature and this kind of complex human emotion and social commentary, and that's all there, and it has been throughout all of his novels. But it really feels like a really big step up in terms of the actual writing style. Again, very interesting when we come to the next novel, The Hand of Ethelberta, as to whether that quality is maintained. So I've got a few notes here, and one of the notes that I wrote down was that most people seem to love the characters and felt that they were quite well-rounded. I think with some of the previous Hardy novels, a few people said that they felt like some of the characters were just there to really hinge the plot on. They weren't necessarily there for their own benefit, and they weren't very well-rounded and very fleshed out, and they didn't feel like very real people. Whereas everyone said that they loved the characters in Far From the Madding Crowd for that reason, because they felt very, very like real people and they were very fleshed out. That's not necessarily to say that people liked the characters, because a lot of people were quite annoyed with Bathsheba. Some people were annoyed at Gabriel because of the way that he behaves and the way he kind of lets Bathsheba behave, or not lets her, that's probably, I don't think anyone actually said that, but the way that he kind of still likes her, I think is what I mean, despite the way that she behaves. So I always think though that when you have a really strong reaction to a character, it's because they are quite realistic, because the writer has done a really good job of making them seem like real people, because otherwise why would you be annoyed at them if they weren't behaving like real people? And I think this is the first novel where almost every character hits notes. I think Sergeant Troy is the only one that I had a few dissenting voices that I noticed from people saying that he didn't feel quite so fleshed out as the other characters, but certainly kind of more so than I think the Hardy novels that we've read so far to this point. I think the love triangle, square, whatever it is, that kind of plot point did bore quite a few people. I think a few people were just done with it because it felt like it was the main focus of the story. It felt like the entire kind of story was really dominated by the relationship narrative, and it almost dominated all of the other aspects of the writing, all the other commentary, all the other themes, all the other stylistic choices that Heidi made. This relationship just seems, or this series of relationships just seemed to kind of completely dominate. And a few people were talking about how they didn't really like romance, so they didn't really like that aspect of the story. I did copy a little bit of the comment that Roz wrote, and I actually realised I ended up quoting the entire thing, so I just want to read it out for anyone who isn't in the Discord or doesn't remember it. But I just think she summarised it so brilliantly. She said that Hardy doesn't write what one might call romantic fiction, but all his novels focus on human relationships. Often these are complex and unhappy. They rarely have the neat endings that epitomise romance, so they're not really romance novels. But if happiness and unhappiness, sexual attraction, loyalty, compromise, disappointment, misunderstandings, betrayal and tragedy in relationships are not things that you enjoy in a novel, you may decide that Hardy is not the author for you. alas. And I think that's just a perfect summary. I don't think his novels are romances, but they have romantic plots, and they have that complexity of human emotion, that complexity of what women's lives were like at the time that he was writing, towards the end of the 19th century, and how society kind of controls women and how women are trying to find their place within society. I think he does that really well, but he does that through the lens of relationships, so we will see that quite a lot more. The next thing that I've noted down, it's a very mild spoiler. Very, very mild. Okay, so if you haven't read the book, I will say this isn't really a spoiler, actually. I don't think it is. So if you don't want to know anything about the book, zero, and you haven't read it yet, you're probably not watching this video because I will be revealing tiny bits about it. But you might want to switch off. But there was some really interesting discussion about the death of a dog in the story and whether Gabriel was cruel for killing a dog. I do think this is a very minor plot point, so I don't think it's a huge spoiler. But there was also a discussion about whether, if the story were written today, whether there would be a content warning because of the death of the dog. And I thought it was just worth mentioning, so I'm going to link in the description box below a video that Ros did, which is partly funny and partly serious, about warnings on Victorian novels. And I think it's really worth having a watch of that. If you haven't yet, please do go and have a watch of that. So there will be a link in the description box. And I just wanted to pause for a moment to talk about this, because my personal feeling on content warnings is that I completely respect the reasons why people want content warnings. And if they want to go search them out, I think that's fantastic. If you need them, they're great that they're there. I personally, as a reader, don't like content warnings, because one of the reasons I read is that when I'm reading things that are very personal to me and very traumatic to me, I actually like to be shocked by them in a novel. And there are some Hardy novels where there are things that are very personal to me that occur in the novels. And I actually liked, when I read them, that I was suddenly startled and suddenly shocked by having this appear on the page, because I think it helps me process those kind of complex emotions, and it really kind of helps me process the trauma, I think. But that's just me personally. And I completely understand why other people go and kind of seek those things out. But it did get me thinking, because it never occurred to me to give warnings about Thomas Hardy novels, but there are some coming up where some very traumatic things happen. And it's never occurred to me to do that. So I was wondering whether I should do content warnings. I'm gravitating towards no as an answer, because I feel like people who need warnings do go and seek those out anyway. And I don't know whether it's my place to give what are actually huge spoilers for the books if I say what they are, because especially for Jude and Tess, which is the ones I'm thinking of. If you've read them, you'll know what I mean. So I actually don't know. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments how you feel about content warnings for books. I'm thinking about the things that are quite, traumatic that happen in books. But yeah, let me know. Like I said, I'm gravitating towards no, I probably won't do it. But again, love to know your thoughts. So leave a comment if you have a particular opinion on that. So the main character of Far From the Madding Crowd, Bathsheba, drew quite a lot of comments, which I found really, really interesting. And a lot of it hinged on people's feelings towards her, whether they thought that she had agency in her life, whether they thought that she could or couldn't cope without a man in her life, if she was annoying or if she was endearing. I particularly loved some of the discussion around the interactions between Bathsheba and Gabriel, about whether him liking her makes sense in the context of the way that they behave together and the way that she behaves towards him, or if perhaps Gabriel likes her. I think somebody said that Gabriel likes her because he understands her feelings and this kind of complexity that she has about her place in society, and trying to work out how she can exercise the power that she has, which is something very new to her, and especially as a woman at that time. And I thought that was a really interesting discussion. And I think that's probably a really great way to segue into how I felt about the story. I just think that Far From the Madding Crowd is a really great character study of someone who doesn't know what their place in the world is. The power within their own life has shifted, and they don't quite know how to behave towards people, especially towards people they knew maybe before that power balance changed, or maybe people that they feel more drawn to but feel like they shouldn't. So they start to make decisions based on that. And I think a lot of Hardy's novels are like that. But I think it's just a really great character study of someone who is really struggling to work out kind of what they can and can't do, and how even just to talk to people. And that's one of the things that I think it makes it really kind of really memorable to me as a novel. I'm really drawn to the characters because I think they have that great complexity in a way that I just really love. As I've said, it's not my favourite Hardy novel. I think I would probably rank it, out of the 4 that we've read so far, I would rank it top, just above Under the Greenwood Tree, which is one of my favourite Hardy novels. I do love it, but it is quite sparse on plot, and I think that's one of the things that Far From the Madding Crowd has a little bit more. So far, Far From the Madding Crowd is top, but I am aware of all of the other novels that are to come. So unless something really drastic happens, I think maybe in early 2026, Far From the Madding Crowd is going to get knocked off the top spot and we're going to get something else. So in the description box below, as I said, I have linked to some other videos that have very recently been uploaded with reviews of Far From the Madding Crowd. So if you really want to get a little bit more in-depth into the book and people's feelings on it, have a look at those and give those a watch. That would be fantastic. Now, I will be back very soon with another video, which will be the preview video of The Return of the Native. This is another book which I think a fair few people have read. It's not one of the biggest Hardy novels. I think it's probably, what would I say were the biggest Hardy novels? I think Tess is probably the top of the ones that people always mention. And then maybe Jude, Far From the Madding Crowd, maybe, I don't know whether that would come above. I'm thinking in terms of ones that people know, ones that people have read, ones that people have on their radar. I think The Return of the Native, along with The Mayor of Casterbridge, and possibly The Trumpet Major, is one that people definitely mention to me, probably in the next group. So I think The Return of the Native is definitely there, and I will be doing a whole introduction to that. I'm really looking forward to reading it because it's definitely a book that has stuck with me. And I have very strong opinions about it. Well, I don't know, strong opinions. I feel very strongly about the characters in that book. Very, very strongly. So I'm looking forward to reading that in November. But I will be coming back very soon with a video that will introduce The Return of the Native and tell you all about it for November. Until then, if you have any comments or any thoughts about Far From the Madding Crowd, if you've got any other reviews of Far From the Madding Crowd that you want me to watch, do let me know in the comments below and I will go and watch those. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.